Hello and welcome. So today we're going to talk about the smart home stuff that I've been talking about installing for, I don't know, weeks now. And if my friends will tell you that I've been talking about it since I moved into this house 7 years ago. And you'll be wondering, in fact, you probably have already wondered when I started talking about smart home stuff, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Dr. Wigo, why don't you already have home stuff in your house? You're a tech guy, you like all sorts of tech stuff. Why isn't it here? Well, there's a story. Of course, if you're a subscriber or you know me, you know there's always a story with me. But this one is kind of it makes a lot of sense. Well, to me. Of course, I've lived it. But I think it makes sense to you too. So let's talk about my history of smart home stuff. So it all started over 30 years ago. I bought a house in Austin, Texas. And I smartified it. And you're thinking, wait, 1990? There was smart home stuff in 1990? Yes, there was. In fact, it was a system called X10. I have an example of it here. Here, I will hold it up. Here, maybe it'll focus on it. X10 was developed in the 70s. And so by 1990, it had been around for like 15 years, and there were a whole bunch of people making components, including Radio Shack, and a company called X10 Powerhouse. If you paid attention when I held this up, it says X10 Powerhouse up here. Now, X10 was an interesting system. How it worked was it sent signals over the electrical wires. So because this has a plug on it and is plugged into the wall, then it could send signals through the wires so that other X10 devices could also then pick up on the signals. And in fact, what I'm holding in my hand, I looked for an actual switch or lamp module. They were called lamp modules, the ones you plugged into a socket, and switches, the ones that go in the wall. I couldn't find any because, of course, you don't need them. But I kept this because, well, I'll explain more later. This is a remote controller. By the way, it's also a lamp module. You can plug something into the bottom of it and it will control that. There's even an on-off switch right there. So you can control it on the lamp module. But it also has a little radio receiver. And I had a little remote and I could press buttons on that remote, and there were like buttons for every device. Oh, but that was the other thing about X10. The way X10 worked is you had what they call, well, a lot of places called them rooms. It was the letters A through O, so 16 letters. Computer people will go, wait, 16, that's suspicious. And then each letter could have 16, a number from 0 to 15, so 16 numbers. So basically 256 devices. An X10 system could control 256 devices. And typically you did it by room, so that like you'd put it on a letter, like I think this is on K. Yeah. This one happens to be on K right now. And then K1 or K0. And then, so you could have 16 devices basically in each room, and then each room would have its own letter. But when you sent out the commands, you could send out commands to other letters. But typically when you bought the cheap little switches for your bedside or this kind of thing, it would only work one room's worth. So you'd have it next to your bed and it would control the lights in your bed, but it wouldn't deal well with elsewhere in the house. Anyway, so that was my first system, and I put in a bunch of them, didn't go crazy, but I put a lot of them in my house in Austin, and it worked pretty well. Basically, I had this plugged in behind my chair where I sat in the living room, and then I could turn the lights off and on and stuff around the house. When I went to go to bed, I could turn on the lights in the hall. I think I only had like less than 16 devices, so I used one room code for everything. Okay, That was my original. Then I sold that house and moved away, and I rented for like the next 10 years. So the next time, so in 2004, I built a house here in the Mid-South. So when I went to build a house, I went, well, I'm going to go all in on this. And when you're building a house, you get to specify where the switches go, where the sockets go on the wall. I laid it out exactly the way I wanted, and I put in places and I had them ran wires inside the walls before they put the walls up. That house was wired 6 ways from Sunday. It was beautifully done. I had everything planned out. Now, by this time, it's now 2004. So in 2004, X10 was still around, but it had been supplanted long ago by a company called Smarthome. Did a system called Insteon. And Insteon was backwards compatible. So it would respond to X10 commands. And you could run X10 devices off an Insteon system. But it added a level of convenience. For example, you saw this little thing here. You take a screwdriver and you set it to what you wanted the address to be. Well, same thing with the switches and the lamp modules. You would turn the little thing and so you could set everything. Insteon did away with all that because actually each device had its own address built into it. And when you installed them, you would touch one and then touch another Insteon device and they would sync up. And so maybe you had a switch by the entry door, right, that turned on the entry light. Well, you could then pair by tapping and linking another light to that also. So when you hit that switch, it would turn on 2 lights or 3 lights. And you could do this all over the place. It was fabulous. And it didn't rely on the power lines anymore. In fact, Insteon devices, well, some of them did, like the lamp modules. But they also added radio control. So it would send signals through the air to the other Insteon devices. So in case the signal in the power line got garbled, it would back it up with a radio signal. Worked great. And you could get software. I had software, Indigo Domotics for the Mac. So Insteon, the other thing about Insteon is they sold these little repeaters that you could like plug into plugs around the house, so it would resend signals. And there were, if you know anything about electricity, we're a 120 volt system. Everything in our houses runs on 120. But what comes into the house is 240, which is what they have, I'm sorry, 220 and 110. It's very common. Anyway, well, what comes in is 220, 240. And then on your circuit breaker panel in your wherever it is in your house, it splits. So you have one side that's 120 or 110, and the other side is 110, 120. But it split the power in half. Now your dryer and sometimes your stove are typically 220. You would they would sell these things that you would plug in your dryer into that and then plug it into the wall. And what it would do was bridge the two sides, so that signals coming on one side would get sent across to the other side and sent back out, so that everybody in your house, every switch in your house could talk to every other switch in your house. It was a good system. It worked great. I think you did need a bridge. I don't think you did in the early days, but you did eventually. Anyway. Oh, and the other difference is, whereas the X10 used the power lines to send signals to each other, Insteon switches used the neutral wires. If you've ever taken off a switch panel and looked in there, there's usually some wire sheathed in white plastic, And they're usually just shoved up in the back and not connected to anything because almost nothing uses those neutral wires, except Insteon switches. I had my whole house, I replaced every switch in that house. I had every lamp, every plug, everything ran off of Insteon. And again, with this software Indigo Domotics, I would have lights come on, the lights going up the staircase would come on at like 20% dimmed. Dimmed to 20%, so that there'd just be like light, a little bit of light going up the stairs, and the outside lights would come on at sunset. And of course, because it was on a computer, it would know that sunset was changing. Oh, and you could even tell it to do it plus or minus 30 minutes from a time every day, or from a sunset every day. So it wouldn't look like it was automatic. It would look like somebody was actually going and flipping the switch, because sometimes it would come on after sunset. It was a fabulous system. I was very, very happy with it. And Insteon, they had these switches that had keypads. So there'd be a big on and a big off, and then there'd be 4 other switches that you could control other lights. So you could have multiple light control from one switch, because it would have these other buttons. And on one of those buttons by the door where you come into my house, I had one of those buttons set for my cleaning lady. When you hit that button, it turned on every light in the house. So when she was cleaning, she could see the dirt, and she really likes it to be bright. And then, of course, when she left, she'd hit it again. It would turn off every light in the house. Fantastic system. And again, this software Indigo Domotics, which is a Mac-only thing, I will link all this stuff down below. Worked great. But I sold that house and bought this house 7 years ago. Well, I don't know if you remember 7 years ago, but about 9 years ago was when the Philips Hue came out, the smart light bulbs that could be controlled. And almost exactly 7 years ago was when Apple announced HomeKit. So I went, oh, well, Apple's going to do it, and I'm an Apple guy. I got iPhones and iPads and everything. This is fantastic. I'll just wait for Apple's solution. Well, I'm still waiting for Apple's solution. HomeKit is, as far as I can tell, most of the products for it are garbage. I bought a couple of little, what they used to call lamp modules back in the day. They're for plugging in and plugging things into the wall. I bought a couple of those. They were HomeKit enabled. I figured I'll try this out because I had a couple of lamps that I wanted to do. You'd press the button and say to start the installation process, and it would run for 20 minutes, and it would time out. And oh my God, it was a nightmare. I only ever got one of them working. The other one I never got to work. And it would say, well, hold it. It's the phone sitting right next to it. I put it next to the router when the phone, everything was rolled. Anyway, don't get me started. So I kept waiting. And then I found this channel on YouTube called Smarthome Solver, which I will link to down below. And he does some stuff, and I watch it. But by the way, if you watch his stuff, it's again, all these things that are incompatible and blah, blah. And I was going, well, damn, you'd think they would have fixed it by now. But no. But he did a video a while back and said, well, here are the switches to go for. The Lutron Caseta. Now, Lutron has been in the smart switch market for many, many, many years, except they were always the most expensive. They were more expensive than the Insteon, and the Insteons were like $80 a switch, and Lutron was more. They were for high end. Well, Caseta, the Caseta Wireless is their bargain brand. It's not nearly as expensive. Here, let me let you see that. This is the starter kit, by the way, that I have right here in my hand. It comes with a switch, a remote, and the important thing, a hub. The Caseta system needs a hub, but then you put it by your wire. And when we do the install video next week, I will be installing this next to my hub, and it will then I'll be able to control things. Now, one of the beauties of both Insteon and Lutron is to do three-way switches. I don't know if you've ever done any electrical wiring, but to actually have a three-way switch in your house where like at the bottom of the stairs it turns the light up there on, and at the top of the stairs there's a switch turns the same light off and on. Well, back in the day, for that to work, there had to be what they called a traveler wire that ran through the walls in between those two. So you couldn't just add a three-way switch. An electrician had to do it. And typically, when the house was being built, so they could do it through the walls without, tearing the walls up. But now, and I have one, Lutron sells these things, and so you get the dimmer, and then you get the remote which will control that dimmer. Ah, and here's the beauty. So for a three-way switch, they make a little thing that goes into where the switch would go in the wall plate, and then you mount the remote in that little thing that will hold it in place. If you notice, they look almost exactly alike. This one has a little button on it, and that one doesn't. But other than that, they have all the same thing. And so now, even though you maybe don't have a wire running between them, you can control the same light from multiple switches. So that's one great thing that the Lutron does. Oh, Lutron also, because again, this is from their long history of doing lighting and stuff, they make these fantastic switch plates, which I don't know if it'll focus on it, but if you notice, it has no screws visible. If you look carefully, it's actually two plates, and this one like snaps on, and the screws and everything are in the back plate. So you have the back plate, you put this, and then you snap this on. By the way, and in electrician's terms, this is a two-gang. And I also have a three-gang, because as you'll see next week when I'm installing this stuff, one of the places, it's a three-gang, there are three switches together, and at the other end there's two switches together. It's a three-way. Now it actually has the traveler, but of course I'm going to be not using the traveler wire because I'm going to use one of these Lutron switches and then the remote mount in the switch. I don't know if you can see, that's exactly the right size to fit in there. Then I also, by the way, bought, this is a switch, not a dimmer, because I have a ceiling fan in there in the living room, and you don't want a dimmer on fans typically. They have to be special kinds of dimmers, or you need special kinds of fans. You need an expert if you're gonna do that. I think most of you, if you've watched the channel or you know me and are a subscriber, you know that I'm a little bit anal compulsive. Well, and this is an old house, so all of my switch plates are beige with the visible screws. Well, I'm going to be replacing some with the white ones without the visible screws. Well, you know what this means. Eventually, I'm going to have to replace every switch in the house so that they all match and have the white plates. Fortunately, this wasn't on purpose. I'm pointing like I'm smart. It wasn't because I'm smart, it's because I'm lucky. I ordered all this stuff a while ago, not a long time ago, but a while ago. So by the time I need to go on to the next phase, I will have forgotten A, how much it costs, and B, that money will be, and so I'll buy another set and then put those in and then wait a while. So that I'll spread the cost out over, it's probably going to end up costing several $1,000s all in, because I mean, well, you'll see the prices down below. Start adding it. Think about how many switches you have in your house. Well, that's how many I'm going to replace. Wait, and then it gets worse, because now I have all these outlets along, on the wall down low, which are also beige. So I'm going to want to put white, except the outlets themselves are beige, which means I'm going to have to replace the outlets. By the way, they have really cool outlets, square, that fit these. And by the way, these days, almost every one of them comes with a USB. So basically, every one of my outlets will have a USB plug in it. Well, not every one, because I think that does cost a little extra. But So that's where we're headed. So come back next week, and we'll start, and I'll give you the whole thing. I'll show you, how to work with the breaker box, how to make sure your stuff's turned off. That's easy. Turn it on, hit the breaker box if it's still on. You didn't hit the right breaker. And I'll show you how to pull the wires out and how to change the stuff, and yeah. So, come back next time. Until then, hang loose and keep your lights on.